inspired you originally to pick up an instrument?
My mom and my mom and dad, they sang in church. They would sing at home, and my mother was always singing around the house. And I would hear Mom and Dad sing together, and I would hear the part that she sang with my dad, which was the tenor, the third. So when Dad was at work and Mom was singing, and before I went to school, she'd start singing something, and I'd hear that third part, and I'd just sing what she would sing. Mm-hmm. And but I'd be in the other room in the house, just kind of not wanting anybody to really know much about it, but I was singing that part. And so she told on me, told my dad. She said, he's singing, and singing harmony with me. And so my dad had a brother that was younger than him by 2 or 3 years. And they used to play together. They were like a little brothers duet kind of thing. My dad played guitar, and my uncle played mandolin and sung tenor. And my dad got rejected from the Army. He had rheumatic fever when he was a young boy, and it scarred his lungs, and they wouldn't take him. And my uncle was young and stout and strapping, and just, So they took him, and he was in 1 year and 1 day, and they went to Guam, and he got killed there. Mm. And it just really, it just crushed my dad, and but I think he made one of those inner vows. He never said it to me at the time, but he made an inner vow. I know that if he ever had a son that showed any kind of musical aptitude or whatever, that he would get him a mandolin, and hopefully he'd sing tenor, and have somebody to sing with again, Mm-hmm. And so, but I'm telling you, it was very wise and genius on my dad's part to get me an instrument that was my size. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of moms and dads make, unless now these kids are just like, I've got to have a guitar, mm-hmm. Or banjo. I think it was wise on my dad anyway to get a small instrument and let me start on a mandolin, because I didn't have this big, massive hulk of a guitar or something like that. Have to stretch and try to learn how to play and hurt my fingers and stuff like that, because I think that's what gets a lot of kids, disenchanted with it, is just the pain of going through it early, Yeah. And but anyway, Dad bought me this little box mandolin, this little old small thing he found in a pawn shop in I think he was in Lima, Ohio. He was up there working a welding job. And of course, we lived in eastern Kentucky, so that was about a 5 or 6 hour drive for Dad on 2-lane roads, especially back in them days. But anyway, when he came in one night he would come home on Friday nights, and spend Friday night or the rest of Friday and Saturday. And sometimes he'd go to church with us on Sunday, or sometimes he'd just have to leave early and drive if it was a real long drive. So I woke up and that little mandolin was in my bed, and man, it just, the way it felt and the way I looked at it was so pretty, and I think he gave $5 for it. It wasn't new or anything, but anyway, he showed me 3 chords on it, G, C, and D, and then he had to go back to work on Sunday, and
let me interject for just a second. Now, how old were you at the time?
I was 5. Yeah, I was 5, and so Dad went back to work, and he got snowed in, and couldn't get home for 2 weeks, and but when he came home after the second weekend, he came home, and I was singing and playing and changing chords. I could hear the changes that it needed to be, when I was singing a song. And it just, blew him away. And Dad had a guitar when him and Mom got married. That was that, and about $25 in an old car was about all they had when they got married. Didn't have a place to live or anything. And anyway, Dad had this guitar, but he had loaned it out to a family friend, And so he, instead of trying to get that guitar back from him, he just he took off and drove to Ashland, Kentucky, and Zwick's Music down in Ashland, and he went down there and bought a 50. I think it was a 59. I bought it in 1960, but it was a 59 D28 Martin. And came home and we started playing and singing together, and that's how that part of it happened. Mm-hmm. That was the first real love of music that I had, where I had an instrument and I was going to start playing on it, and I just remember carrying it around all the time. I remember I had a little wagon that I'd still pull around, and I'd have that thing in my wagon just rattling around. I don't think it even had a case or anything, and but when these other kids had a security blanket that they'd go to bed with, I'd take that mandolin to bed, and I'd just keep it in my bed, and I'd hold on to it, and I'd go to sleep, and I'd wake up, and there it'd be, and I'd set up my bed, and I'd just kind of pluck it a little bit, But I loved the sound of it, I always have, and always will, and I love it so much even today. That's my number one go-to instrument is the mandolin, although I've played a lot of guitar and fiddle and stuff like that in different bands. But the mandolin is something that it suits me. It's the instrument that I feel like I can make maybe the most expression on and create the most uniqueness to me, that I play.
Well, what were those early years like in terms of, I'm sure you played probably a lot in church, but other than that, what about, did your dad take you to a lot of just jam sessions and that sort of thing?
There wasn't a lot of jamming in Eastern Kentucky at that time. Wasn't a lot of bands. There was one band, this band, Walter Adams and the Playboys was their name. And it was Walter Adams and a guy named Elmer Burchett, and sometimes my cousin, if he was sober, would play fiddle with us, Euless Wright, and then me and Mom and Dad, and we'd play, I don't know, like talent shows, or I know I was in a lot of talent shows as a kid, but there was a place called the Pan Theater over in Portsmouth, Ohio, and we would go over there and play. It was a big tour for us, but it'd go to Ohio, another state.
Yeah.
And cross the river there in Ashland and drive up, the river there and play in Portsmouth. And then we'd play, just different little things around home. A lot of it was in church. And then, we'd have some people come over to the house and we'd jam a little bit around the house. But it wasn't like there was 20 jam sessions going on, which one you want to go to, like there is nowadays. There just wasn't that many players around. There was a man that used to play with Walter Adams. His name was Thurman Endicott. And he had a wandering eye. I don't know, he'd been stuck or been shot or been something, I don't know. He's a little old short guy, looked like Pee Wee Lambert, real little guy, and played mandolin, and his eye would just go everywhere, and it just freaked me out when I'd see him. But he had this F5 Gibson, is a new one, and he didn't want me to even touch it. So finally one day he let me play it, and he didn't let me play it long, and he sung high tenor too, and Daddy called him High Therm, but they had a good sound. Them guys did. They did a record, and I don't know if I could even find it now, but Walter Adams used to play, or not Walter Adams, the fiddle player. Moon Mullins used to play in this band. I used to play with Walter Adams and him. But it was Paul Mullins back in those days. It was before he started his radio journey and became Moon Mullins. Anyway, that was a real. I don't know. It was a growing time for me, and I was getting tunes in my head and just a little old things. I was learning to sing and listen to the radio a lot. You know, Mom loved. We had some great radio stations back in them days. Man, the Prestonsburg, Kentucky had a good radio station. Grayson, Kentucky had a good station. Paintsville had a good station. And Olive Hill, that's where Paul Mullins ended up being in Olive Hill. And man, of course, there was good music back in those days too. I mean, country was just so good, you know. I mean, George Jones, and that's before Haggard ever come out, you know, or Buck Owens ever come out, you know, that we ever heard. But George Jones was great, and of course Webb Pierce and Ray Price, and Mom loved George Jones, and anyway, so we listened to real country radio, and of course Kitty Wales and people like that, you know, Patsy Cline, and. But hey, you could hear on the same stations, you would hear Munn, you know, and you'd hear Jimmy Martin, and you'd hear Flatt and Scruggs, and you'd hear the Stanleys. Oh my God, but Stanley Brothers, they just wore them out because they were from right over the hill in Kentucky or in Virginia, you know. So they were like our local boys, you know. And so man, I grew up hearing, you know, Ralph and Carter, and of course, never really got to hear Pee Wee. Until later on, until me and Keith met, you know, when we were 15. I started buying a bunch of old records, and I guess maybe that I'd heard some of the records, like Lonesome River and White Dove. White Dove was a song that they would play a lot, even in Eastern Kentucky, as just an old record that still had life to it, you know. But they wouldn't say, that's Ralph and Carter Stanley with Pee Wee Lambert singing, like, you know, like Eddie Stubbs now. He tells every musician in the band, you know, which is great. Yeah. So I didn't know the personnel. I didn't know who Pee Wee was at that time, you know. But I heard the name Pee Wee Lambert later on, but even before I met Keith. My cousin that I was talking about, Paul Wright, Euless Wright, lived down in Ashland, Kentucky. And Pee Wee Lambert and his wife, Hazel, moved from Columbus, Ohio. They moved from, I guess they might have been in Bluefield, West Virginia for a while when they were with Ralph and Carter, or even Grundy, Virginia. They could have lived over there somewhere. But they moved after Pee Wee left Ralph and Carter. I guess that would have been 52, maybe 51 or 52. They moved to Ashland, Kentucky, and Pee Wee took a road job. I mean, just like working on the road with this guy, and this guy played and sang, you know, and Pee Wee would sing and play, you know, record with him. Curly Parker was his name, and my cousin Euless Wright played fiddle with them. So when we'd see my cousin playing fiddle, or when he'd come by our house or something like that to visit, he would talk about Pee Wee, you know, and tell us about Pee Wee Lambert, you know, and because Pee Wee was a great mandolin player and a great singer, so I kind of stored him in the back of my head as somebody that I probably needed to check out sometime, but I really didn't know the history that he had with the Stanleys, you know, until after me and Keith met, and I saw this record that I bought, and looked, and there was Ralph and Carter in the middle, and they were just young boys. They looked like they might have been 19 or 20, you know. And this kid, he looked about the same age, but he was standing on Ralph's right, and he had this F4 mandolin. It was an old black and white picture, and an old man standing on Carter's left playing the fiddle. And it looked like they was in somebody's living room in the late 40s, early 50s. Had to be late 40s because Pee Wee would have had the Pee Wee mandolin by 46. So this must have been 43, 44, something like that they took this picture, because you could see the wallpaper. It just looked so old. You could tell that it was an old house. And but that was the cover on this, I guess it was Richard Tone label records that they did. And that's where I really got to know Pee Wee and got to know his sound and everything like that.
Talk about how you got to play with Ralph eventually.
When I was 6 years old, we found out that Bill Monroe was coming to Martha, Kentucky. And man, I wanted to go see him so bad, because I'd heard him on the radio and heard his records and stuff, and we'd listen to him on the Grand Ole Opry. But I didn't know what he looked like. We didn't have, our internet didn't work up there then. iPhone wasn't working. I couldn't Google anything. I didn't even know what he looked like. And so we went, and we got up there a little early, you know, and we wanted to see him drive in, you know. So I'd been playing around the area there, you know, since I was 5 in churches and little, you know, bean stringings and cakewalks and stuff like that at high schools. I mean, crazy stuff. So people kind of began to know me a little bit, and Dad and Mom, you know. We went in, got our tickets, you know, I think it's 25 cents to get in and see him, maybe 50. Got in there and sat down and was listening to the show, and all of a sudden, this neighbor in the hood just shouted out, you know, let little Ricky Skaggs get up there and sing one. And, man, I slid out of my seat. I was so embarrassed, so shy. God. So Munn just kicked right into another song. I was like, good, you know. And so Munn did another song or two and started to talk again, and this feller hollered out again. So I think Munn was wanted to put a stop to it and get rid of the heckler, and so he called me up. He said, "Where's that little Ricky Skaggs? Get him on up here." And I come walking up there, and the stage wasn't very tall off the floor. It was just a little old stage, and he just reached down and picked me up by the arm and just set me up on the stage, asked me what I played, and I told him I played the mandolin. Mm-hmm. And he took his big F5, you know, good Lord, you know, we call it Excalibur, that's what I call it, that sword of his, and, you know, and wrapped the boot strap around, you know, boot string. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought, man, he's got leather on there. You know, I've got a little old cloth on mine, you know, mm-hmm. and he's got a piece of leather on as for a strap. It was just an old boot string, you know, and he had it wrapped around there, and he just kind of wrapped it around the curl so it would fit me, you know, and set it on me. Asked me what I wanted to play, and of course, Ruby, "Are You Mad at Your Man?" That was that was your big hit, Rick. So that's, you know, and thank goodness, you know, the band knew it. You know, it was an mm-hmm. Osborne Brothers song, pretty popular, and you know, around that time, and so we took off, you know, and I played that song, and Munn set me off stage, and I kind of went on my way, you know. But the next year, when I was 7, we moved to Nashville. And Dad was always wanting to get me on the Grand Ole Opry. He just thought if I can get him on the Opry, you know, he could make it. He'd go somewhere, you know, get some good exposure. And so I did the show. We actually met Earl backstage, you know, at the Ryman. That's when the Opry was down there, and. You know, he heard me playing back there. I just had my mandolin out, and I was kind of leaned up against one of the walls back there, you know, and just playing a little bit. And he just walked by and just stopped, you know, and just grinned so big. And of course, he had Randy and Gary by then, you know, and so he was probably sympathetic to kids wanting to play, instruments and stuff. And so he asked my dad if he'd bring me down for an audition the next week, you know, and so we did, and went down for the audition downtown in Nashville. We was living in Goodlettsville out here. And I made the audition. So they set up a time to record, you know, do the show, mm-hmm. you know. Well, that show came on and everything, and you know, it was great and big deal. You know, my little grandma up in Eastern Kentucky, she was, talk about country now, and I mean down home, old school. When she seen me on TV, she thought that somehow I was in there, that I could feel that. And she went and kissed the television and patted me, as my grandpa told me. And it was just, man, I'm telling you, that's the kind of people I came from, the innocent, pure, mm-hmm. godly people, you know, just the most precious thing. And anyway, when we moved back to Eastern Kentucky, I guess, you know, Dad had got his back hurt when I was 8. Down in a job he was working here in Tennessee. Well, actually, he's working in Paradise, Kentucky, which is right across the border from Tennessee here. He's working on the TVA power plant down there, and he got his back hurt real bad, and so we ended up moving back to the old home place there in Eastern Kentucky. And I was about 8, and we heard that that Stanley Brothers were going to be coming through Olive Hill, you know. Mm-hmm. And so we went to see him. And Dad was just Mr. Personality. He never met a stranger. He'd just go in anywhere. And stick his hand out and shake hands, and had the greatest personality. I mean, you couldn't say no to him. And so he just went back there and met Carter. And Carter was very, very nice, very kind, and he and Dad started talking about coon hunting, and so that just sealed the deal. That got everything working, and Carter was a big coon hunter, so was Dad. And anyway, Carter just asked, what I played, and I told him I played the mandolin, and Dad said, yeah. I said, now when he's 6, said he played with Bill Monroe up there in Martha, Kentucky, up there where we're from, and said last year he played with Flatt Scruggs on the television show, and he said, well, we'll put you on. Said, we'll get you out there. So that was how I met him.
Yeah.
That was how I met Ralph and Carter. And then they invited us to come to Prestonsburg, I believe, is where they was going to be the next night. So we went up there and played with them. And so I didn't see Ralph anymore till after me and Keith met, and I was 15. And we we'd heard that Roy Lee Centers, that Ralph had hired a new guitar player and lead singer, that Larry Sparks had left and started his own band, and that Ralph had hired a new singer. And so we went to Fort Gay, West Virginia, this beer joint over there I think it's called Jim and Faye's. So they, of course, Dad had to take us in because, we was way underage to be in a beer joint, but
yeah.
Dad took us in, and Keith's brother Dwight Whitley went with him. And we'd been playing a little bit because we'd met and kind of known each other and for, 6-8 months maybe. And so Ralph called in and said he had a flat tire on the bus and they were going to have to change it and everything like that, so that he's going to be late. And so the beer joint owner came up, and he must have known me and my dad from playing, in Louise at some different little things like that. So he said, y'all bring your stringing instruments, and Dad said, yeah. I said, we got them in the car. So we went out there and said, we need y'all to play for a while till Ralph gets here. He said, we got a full house and people wanting some music. So we got up there and started playing. We felt, a little, we was excited about getting to play, but we felt a little intimidated playing, in front of them people that come to see Ralph,
Yeah, right.
But the good thing about it is the only songs we really knew was Stanley Brothers songs, because that was mine and Keith's favorite singers. Favorite music was Stanley Brothers, and so we knowed a bunch of them. And so Ralph comes walking in about 45 minutes later, and he doesn't go to his dressing room. He pulls up a bar stool and just sits there and listens to us play. He's got his banjo sitting in the floor, kind of got his arm up on it, and he's sitting there with his black leather coat on. And it's like I was just wishing that he wasn't in my vision, because I could see him sitting out there, and I thought, Ralph, would you please go back to your dressing room? Because I'm singing your songs and singing your part, and I know that I'm not singing it good enough, And so anyway, we met that night, reconnected that night, and Ralph, when he got up, on their set they played, and he said, well, how about them two young boys, Skaggs and Whitley, and he said, boys, he said, we're going to get y'all to get up on our break and play if you want to. And we said, well, yeah. So we got up and played on the second break. And so anyway, that's that night, I talk about, to a lot of people, I talk about defining moments that come in your life that shift where you are to where you're going.
Yeah.
And that was the Monroe night. That was a shift. Mm-hmm. That was a paradigm shift kind of for me. Not that it made me go in a different direction, but him approving of me and giving me a spot in his spotlight for 4 or 5 minutes. That he moved out of the way and let me do something. That did something in my psychic. It just it made me feel in my heart that I had something special. I had something musically that was good, musically that I could get better at it, and something I wanted to get better at. I didn't want to just stay where I was, and and so that was a defining moment. Then getting to meet Ralph and Carter, and then being with Ralph later on, that was a real defining moment, because Ralph asked us to come back in a month or 6 weeks, whenever he was going to be back there, and play with him again. So we did the same thing there another time. So. And then he told us when he's going to be in Columbus, or he's going to be in Cincinnati, or somewhere close enough we could drive, because we was in school, couldn't really travel the road. So he, whenever we could, he would want us to go out on the road and just join him. And it'd be just me and Keith. It wouldn't be Dad and Dwight. It would just be me and Keith get up and sing with Ralph and in the band. And but that started a relationship, with Ralph, and we. So when we got out of school that summer, I had just turned 16, I hadn't turned 16. I was going to turn 16 in July, but we got out in I don't know, May or something other like that, whatever, when the school's out. And so we went out and spent the summer out working with Ralph, and then I turned 16 in July, and went back to school in my high school, my senior year. I went back and could not wait for that year to get over, because Ralph we had a job with Ralph as soon as we got out of high school, so we could go be full time. But that moment with Ralph at Fort Gay, West Virginia, and him having a flat tire, that opened up a opportunity for me and Keith, and that really is what, to me, started my career. Although the night with Munn was a big deal. That was more for me maybe than it was for my career. I don't know. You know what I mean? It just
internally.
Internally, I think it substantiated something in me that was worth it. That was good, but maybe that time with Munn, and maybe that thing with Earl and Lester, because Dad told Earl, that I'd played with Monroe, when I was 5, and so that was a validation somehow, I guess, maybe, but I don't know, but all of those little things, I think, were just little breadcrumbs along the way. That was just enough for me to eat there and then go to another place and have a little nab there, but it was all part of my young growing.
Talk for just a minute about being in the Country Gentleman and what those days were like.
Well, when I left Ralph in, I guess, 1973, 73, I didn't even know if I wanted to work the road anymore. I kind of got got burned out, just a lot of traveling. We did a lot of dates, and I wasn't making much money, $30 on Friday and $35 Saturday and $35 Sunday, so I could make $100 for a weekend, Yeah. And I had a car. Well, I don't think I had a car payment at that. Yeah, I did. I had a car payment at that time. I surely did, and because Dad had co-signed a loan for me to be able to I got me a Volkswagen, and so I'd have to drive down to Virginia to meet with Ralph, get with him and stuff. So I had my eye on a gal, and she moved up to her sister's house up in Virginia, Northern Virginia. And so when I left Ralph, I moved up there and got a job at it was called VEPCO, Virginia Electric and Power Company. And man, that was a tough gig. And so I worked there for a little while. And
what did you do?
I was a high pressure boiler operator. An assistant high pressure boiler operator. Assistant in training, I guess. And what I had to do, it was an electric company that they burned oil at the time. They had a lot of coal out there, but it was kind of for emergencies, But they were burning oil, and but they were making electricity, and so part of what my job was just to go read meters and check levels, pressure levels, and stuff like that, and make sure everything was doing what it was supposed to do. And I worked a week of 7 to 3, and then I'd work a week of 3 to 11, and then I'd work a week of 11 to 7. Son, that was work. Lord have mercy me, that was tough. Because you never get rest. I mean, that whole time you just stayed tired all the time. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I'd get hungry to play, or just for some music. And so the Country Gentleman was playing at the Gray Fox, at the Shamrock Inn in Washington D.C. And so I would go down there and watch them play, listen to them, And of course, that was when Goodrow was in the band, because we had met him when we played with Ralph. One time we went to see the Country Gentlemen. They came to Echo Canyon in Prestonsburg, and so we went out to meet them and everything like that and see them. And so Goodrow was there, and then Duffy had a band, the Seldom Scene, up in Bethesda, Maryland, at the Red Fox. And so there was a couple of pretty good bands to go see through the week, And so I knew Bill Emerson real well, and Doyle from the Country Gentlemen. Because at that time, Doyle was with the Gentlemen, and later on, he wasn't with him when Goodrow was there. But when Goodrow left, Doyle came in, and so I knew Bill Emerson real well, and he was going to be playing with, or he was playing with the Country Gentlemen. So he just called me one day. I don't know how he got my phone number, but he called me up and asked me if I would want to come and record with them up in New York. They were going to go record for Vanguard, and I said, well, what's Doyle going to play? He said, he's going to play mandolin. And I thought, you mean you want me to play fiddle? And he said, yeah. I said, we want you to play fiddle. He said, we've never had a fiddler on any of the Country Gentlemen's records, And he said, you'd be the first, and you play whatever you want to play, And so that's how that all happened, and I went and did that first Vanguard record for them, and I'd go sit in with them, and that Vepco job was kind of growing old on me, and so one day Emerson called and said, hey, he said, what would you think about joining the band, And I said, yeah. So I joined the band, started traveling with them, with Doyle and Bill Emerson. Well, it wasn't long after that, probably 6 months after that, Bill Emerson decided to get off the road and take a job with a Navy band. And Doyle kind of contemplated it for a little bit, but then he decided he didn't want to do it, And so we had numerous banjo players that came in and out, Yeah. But that's how I got with the Gentlemen.
All right. Let's also talk about getting in JD's band, JD Crowe The New South.
All right. The whole time that I was with the Country Gentlemen after Ralph and playing some of the Seldom Scene and all of that, Whitley and I had always wanted, or we talked about anyway, getting our own band sometime, And so when Roy Lee got killed, he got murdered. Ralph, because me and Keith went to the funeral, and Ralph took us to lunch that day and asked, because I was with a gentleman then, and Ralph asked Keith if he wanted to take over the job and come back, and sing lead and everything, and so Keith did, and he stayed with Ralph a pretty good while. And but me and Keith was always talking about about getting a band and all that, So because I didn't know how long he'd want to stay with Ralph, So I got a call from JD and said that Larry Rice was leaving the band, And he said, "Man, you're our first call. We'd love for you to come sing tenor and Tony and play mandolin, you know." And so I was about ready to leave, leave the Gentleman. I don't know why. It just seemed like about every couple of years I'd stay, and another door would open, and I'd move on and go somewhere else. Maybe 3 years at the most somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I ended up, one of the things that was hard for me, I think, in the Gentleman Band, is that I didn't get to sing any. I played fiddle and would play a little bit of guitar, play mandolin some when Doyle was playing guitar or something, and I just felt like I wasn't being used to my max,
Yeah.
And so even singing some baritone with Charlie and Doyle, that wasn't my part.
Right.
Charlie sang so low that it was, singing baritone just didn't really satisfy me. So I was ready to leave. I was ready to do something else. So when JD, said tenor, mandolin, wow, Tony, oh my God, because me and I had worked on Tony's first record. So California Autumn, yeah. And so I worked on that. John Starling produced it for Tony, and so I worked on that with him. And when we sung together in the studio on that record, we'd never really sung together before. But man, our voices just blended, and we phrased easily. He didn't phrase quite like me, but it was. The way Tony phrased was something that he did it the same pretty much all the time, and so I was able to learn it pretty quick and sing with him, and so I decided to take the Crowe band job. I didn't have a good mandolin at all, and so when I was with Ralph, we were every time we'd go to Port Huron, Michigan, or Detroit area up there. There was an old cat that would come out and just tantalize me with a lure. He had this Lloyd lure that a guy had sold him. The guy was Jim Williams, the guy, and Jim had been with Ralph and Carter, so he played with Carter and Ralph, and Jim was notorious for scraping off finish and cutting down necks and this crazy stuff. They called him Tool because he carried a toolbox with him all the time, and would work on instruments. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Ralph, I loved the way that mandolin sounded. It sounded so great, especially from what I had, and that guy would never sell that mandolin. He just wouldn't sell it. And Ralph tried to get it for me, when I was in his band. So anyway, I started looking around for a mandolin, and I looked through an old wallet or something I'd stuck in a drawer, and I went through some business cards, and there was that guy's phone number. So I thought, man, he might have died or something, who knows. So I called him up and asked him if he'd be willing to sell that mandolin, And I said, I just took a job with J.D. Crowe. And he said, well, I like old J.D. I said, well, I need a good mandolin. I said, man, I don't, I said, you want to sell that? Well, I wouldn't take nothing less than, and he gave me a price, and it was $2,250. Why that number came up, I'll never know. But anyway, I said, all right, well, you give me a week to get some money together. That could have been $25,000, for me. I didn't have $2,200. Yeah. But I bought it on faith, And I knew I had a good job with JD, and I'd end up getting it paid off, Yeah. But anyway, I went to Hugh Sturgill. Hugh was working with Ralph with JD and trying to get some business stuff like that done. So Hugh co-signed a loan for me, and I got the mandolin, and John Paganoni put just a little light finish on it, and recovered the case because the case didn't have any cover on it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I got that mandolin about the time. It wasn't long after I had been in with JD, and I got it pretty quick. And so I stayed with JD. Well, we went and recorded. I had it before we went and recorded the 44. That's what. Yeah, 44. The Rounder record, Old Home Place, and I used that mandolin on it, and used it live all the time, and loved playing with them. God, I loved it so much. And that band could have stayed together another 3 or 4 years, you know. That would have been fantastic. But Tony decided he was going to get out of Lexington, and David Grisman had called him about putting a band together, David Grisman Quintet. And that just kind of, enticed Tony to want to learn and play more stuff. I mean, I used to go up to Tony's house after we'd play and get off stage at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and his wife would cook dinner for me and him, and my wife would be in bed, and so me and Tony would sit there and listen to, all these jazz guitar records, and so because I knew he loved it, and so anyway, he left, and all during those like Country Gentlemen, around the Seldom Scene time. I mean, I wasn't really a part of that band. I did some recording with them. But then the Crowe band, because when I called JD back and told him that, I would take the job, but I said, me and Keith, want to put a band together. We've talked about it ever since we was kids. And I said, so, if the time comes, and Keith wants to do this, he said, come and play with us until that day comes, Yeah. And I said, all right. So that's how I took it on the notice that I might leave. So anyway, Keith decided, Keith was actually had talked about doing the band that ended up being Boone Creek, but then he backed out last minute, and so did Mark Pruitt, backed out last minute, and because he wanted to do a music store with Matt, his brother. And so Balcom, I'd already had Balcom, and Jerry Douglas was going to leave the Gentlemen and come and be in the band. And so we just, so Terry was hired to play fiddle. He'd been playing with Charlie Moore, and so Terry was going to play fiddle. But then he said, well, hey, I kind of grew up playing banjo. And so he ended up being the banjo player, and we hired Wes Golden, and that's how Boone Creek then was developed. But, we did 2 records for Boone Creek, or with Boone Creek, and then, but we only did that one studio record with JD, but there was a live recording from Japan that, that ended up being, coming out too. But, but those were incredible musical days, those days with JD, and then finally getting what I would consider a band where I, was a partner, kind of thing. It wasn't with Keith, but it was still, a partnership with Jerry and Wes and Terry Balcom, and various bass players. And Vince came in a band there for a while too, and worked with us. But those were years that I grew exponentially musically. I grew in my singing, because when I came with JD, it's like I'd never fronted a show in my life, and Tony didn't want to do it, and JD sure wasn't going to front a show, and Mr. No Talk, and so I was kind of left to to kind of front the show and introduce the songs, introduce the band, and try not to be stupid. Although that I didn't do real good at that. It just was so stupid. We would tell jokes to each other, and the audience out there didn't know what we were talking about. But I've learned a little better since then. But that was my first experience in that. And of course with Boone Creek then, I kind of fronted the show in that as well. But those were great years, and great years too, especially in Boone Creek. That was a different thing, because we didn't want to sound old school bluegrass. We wanted to be inventive. We wanted to be creative. We wanted to do something that was unique to us, not something that had never been done. It wasn't that kind of thing, but it was something that we really wanted to. Jerry's style. I mean, he was taking Mike Aldridge and Josh, and just really doing some crazy new kind of things with it, playing with a capo and stuff like that. That was never been, And then, and Wes was writing songs, and I was just trying to find things that were, that was not necessarily bluegrass, but maybe even country things that we could take and kind of make into a thing where we could do do bluegrass instrumentation with it, and so that was informative years, creative years for me. Well, when we were with Ralph, one of the jobs we had was to sell records after the show. Me and Keith would sell records. Well, everybody had a record but us. Curly Ray had his records out there hawking them, and keychains, and me and Keith didn't really have anything. So Ralph said, "I want you boys to do your record, and I'll help you do it, and so we went to. We were going to be in Cincinnati playing a show, and I remember it. It was the 8th of January that we recorded that record. We went in the morning, and we had our songs picked out that we were going to do, and Ralph had agreed to come and sang some with us, and Roy Lee played some banjo on some of it. It wasn't Ralph on all of it, but we just used the Clinch Mountain boys. Curly played fiddle, and I played mandolin, and Keith played guitar and sang, and so we did. It was a tribute to the Stanley Brothers was the name of it, and so we stuck to Stanley Brothers music, and so that's how all that came down. And we went into this little studio. A guy named Jack Lynch that lived in Cincinnati. He had a record label called J-Lyn Records, Jalyn or something like that. I don't know, but it's Jack Lynch Records, and he was an old friend of Ralph's, and I think Ralph may have done a record for Jalyn with Larry Sparks. I'm not sure exactly, but anyway, we did that record, and I remember, we went and had a picture done over in Sandy Hook, Kentucky. This guy that took wedding pictures and stuff, or took family portraits, and so me and Keith had our gold coats on that we wore with Ralph on the road. And these lame kind of, jackets, flowery jackets. And so we sent that off to Cincinnati to Queen City, Publishing, or where they made records. It was a disc, manufacturing. Yeah. So anyway, I guess Jack took the record down there. There wasn't no overdubs. There wasn't. It was all on quarter inch. And so we just, we did a take, and if we liked it, we kept it. If we didn't, we'd do another one, give us one more chance. But it wasn't like it was cut to disc or something like that where it was sweating bullets, that we didn't work a string or didn't sing a bad note. And but anyway, that's how that record was cut. And I remember us driving. Dad went with us. Of course, had to. He was 15. But we all drove to Cincinnati when they called us and said the records were done. And we went up there and picked up boxes of records. I think we ordered 500 records or something like that in these big boxes. I think there were 50 in a box, so we had 10 boxes. Keith took 5 and I took 5. And so anyway, we'd sell those on the road and make a little extra money. And Curly Ray had told us about record stores up and down eastern Kentucky there that we could stop at and try to sell records to, and we ended up doing that some too. But the second record, Second Generation Bluegrass, that was done. One day. We did that record, and that was at Roy Homer's place, his studio up in Maryland. Either it wasn't Silver Spring, but it was somewhere in Maryland where Dick, Rebel, that had Rebel Records. So we did that record up there that one day, and then the second day we did Ralph's record. I think Something Old, Something New. Let's see, Some of Katie's Mountain Dew or something like that. That was the name of that record. Yeah, Dick Freeland.
Was that one also recorded?
Just live to the quarter-inch tape, 2 tracks, stereo, but it was
same basic process on
no
that one too,
overdubs,
right?
And son, it sounds it.
Talk about just for a second how the recording process changed for you through the years.
Well, goodness gracious, when I went to work with Emmy Lou because I met her up in D.C. when I was working with a country gentleman in Seldom Scene. I met her at John Starling's house, and so when she put a band together, when she got signed to Warner Brothers, she put a band together, and her husband at the time, Brian Ahern, was a great producer, produced Anne Murray, came out of Canada, came to Toronto, and he and Emmy had married, and so he was producing her records, and he wanted me to play some fiddle on some of her records, and so we did them in D.C. up there in Silver Spring, Maryland, at George Massenburg's studio up there. So that was the first time I'd ever seen like a 16-track studio, and so then later on, I went to L.A. and started working with Emmy Lou out there after I joined her band, and Brian had the Enactron truck, he called it, and which is now at the Musicians Hall of Fame Museum. It's really incredible to go see. I can't wait to get in there and see it now that they've put it in the display. Mm-hmm. But so many hundreds of huge records have been cut in there. But Brian had a 24-track machine, and so it was multi-track. So we could do overdubs. We could do fixes and punch-ins and stuff like that, and so that part of the recording for me started changing when I realized that I could have another take of something, so that was really, really great. I really enjoyed the recording process. That was on analog. It was 16-track, then 24-track, and then we started doing digital multi-tracking, which would go up to 48 tracks. And so my Live in London record was done on 2 48-track machines and 3M, and we'd run one, and then right before we started to stop the one, we'd start the other, so we didn't miss anything. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to do 2 nights that way, and but then music started changing more into a format like radar, and I loved the sound of radar because it sounded analog to me. It sounded like tape, but yet it was still digital. And then they improved radar, and it really, really sounded great. Then Pro Tools was something that came in and started kind of getting in the process. So cutting and pasting was part of the equation, being able to take a chorus and, hey, that's a great chorus. Let's just use that on the second chorus, and no one will ever know the difference. And then we started singing the second chorus a little bit different, just to make it sound, sound like it was a different chorus. But anyway, tricks of the trade. But I've always been a geek on recording gear. When I moved to Nashville, because Brian Ahern had so much great equipment, great mics, and he taught me about mics and vocal mics and instrument mics and compressors and EQ and stuff like that. I learned so much from him, and he knows that I appreciate it because I've told him many times how honored I was to have been set under his tutelage, even though he didn't take me off and say, this is what you're going to learn. I was not in a classroom. It was actually working in his studio. I would learn it because I would hear the difference that this mic made as opposed to the other microphone, and why that he chose to use that mic. And so I learned so much about producing, watching him and being with him. And but the recording process these days is much, much different, and honestly, when we did Bluegrass Rules, our first bluegrass record, it was me and Kentucky Thunder, and we got in a studio and we did it on 16-track. It was the old studio that Woodland studio downtown, and I think Dave Rollins and Gillian owns it now. I think that's where they own that, and they live in there too. And but we recorded Bluegrass Rules. I think we had 2 days that we did that record, but we did it live. I say live. We all got in there and played. Brian Sutton was playing guitar, Mark Fain on the bass, Mark Pruitt was playing banjo, and Bobby was on the fiddle, and I was on the mandolin, and Paul Brewster. And so that was, and Dennis Parker. And so that was our band. And so when, and Dennis is back with me, praise God, after 20 years of being away. And but that was the way we cut it. And if we needed to do a punch in, because we were so close to each other in there, if Paul had to fix something, or if I had to fix something that me and Paul was singing on, we'd go in there, put headphones on, and I'd play mandolin, and he'd play his guitar, and the guy would punch in. Alan Schulman would punch in and punch out, And we did it to analog tape. We did it to 16-track. It wasn't digital then, and it was an amazing sounding record.
Oh, yeah.
It's just so fine.
Tell people real quickly about your book, where they can find that, Kentucky Traveler.
Yeah.
Make sure people know about it. And
yeah. If these stories have made you want to go to sleep, or or if they've kind of spurred your interest a little bit, stirred you up some, you can get my book, Kentucky Traveler: My Life and Music, at SkaggsFamilyRecords.com, and that's here in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Or any of the CDs that you would want to buy. You can download them on iTunes, but they don't have the covers with them. So I like to read covers. I like to read credits and find out who's singing on what and who's playing on what. So it makes it a whole lot easier. So you can get those at SkaggsFamilyRecords.com as well.